Hey there, welcome to episode 28 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, recording in the morning, nearly noon, on May 22nd, 2024. Today's episode of Quaggling Sand is about the good old TARGA 2000, made by True Vision. Eventually, True Vision was purchased by Pinnacle. Pinnacle was purchased by Avid. And to be honest, I don't know who is still around. But this is the good old days. I think it was around 1996. So we will harken back to the good old TARGA 2000 at True Vision in Santa Clara, California. Silicon Valley to you and me. Wherever you found this audio program, hopefully you have access to the show notes, the description of the episode, the section with the heading show notes, hopefully has my name under it, and the summary, which today is very brief. Once upon a time, recording video is actually challenging. I will have two things to say about that, or two things to say before we get into today's episode. One, if you're not familiar with what quaggling sand is, it is a term I coined very early in my engineering career. I think I was about 5 years old, and so a freshman in college or something. So the feeling you get when circulation returns to a limb, maybe your head, if you've been sitting on it or otherwise blocked circulation. So that pins and needles, as some people call it, quaggling sand. It is generally personal musings, stories, tales, observations, lessons learned or to be learned. So I try to remind people every once in a while what that really is, quaggling sand. So there you go. And two, recording video was completely new to me at the time. So I have had this odd vantage point of being new to video recording without real experience doing it. I really had no idea what I was getting into. And watching this over the years with flash storage completely outstripping the fastest SCSI 3 RAID 0 striped hard drive arrays, the good old days of NTSC overscan 720 by 480 interlaced, PAL, SICOM. I don't even remember. What is PAL? 576 by something. I can't remember. Who even thinks about these things anymore? I would think about them quite a bit when I worked at Philips later on analog to digital conversion, and so VESA timings and all that. But it was an interesting step along the way of my engineering career. It was an interesting set of skills to acquire, and that is what we will talk about today. The two links that if you've listened to my audio programming before, you are familiar already, the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and the ko-fi.com/DanHugo. That's ko-fi.com. I use these for what I like to call out-of-band self-promotion rather than putting these on my own website. I actually have something like a link tree. I think it's called bio.link, bio.link, I think. I haven't been including that because the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page is freeform. It is not perfect, far from it, but I don't have to, I'm not just providing links. There's actually a little bit of context and different sections. There's the GitHub project links. There are the audio programming links, this show among them, and so on. So buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You can go there and be linked to my various properties so I don't have to cross-promote them too much in show. And eventually when there are websites, which I've been talking about forever, and it's been very frustrating. It's not at the top of the list, unfortunately, to get those going with a lot of other things on the deck, on the table, on deck. So when they do hit the air, when the sun shines upon them, I can link to them from there, and people will find them. You are under no obligation for either of those sites to actually buy anything, coffee or otherwise. You can if you want. A couple of people have over the years. Nothing to. There's no rent being paid. However, I do and did apply those offerings to my coffee bank. So I purchased a few. I want to say £1 or so in each case maybe a little less, 12 ounces, 16 ounces of coffee beans. So my projects are powered by coffee. If you want to add to the stash, more power to you. Not required. The third link you will find is the Wikipedia link to True Vision. It's a brief, quick rundown on the company. True Vision itself was an AT&T project, ironically, created to come up with a way to compress video so that it could be transmitted over phone lines, phone networks. Fun fact, back in the good old days, the TV broadcasting signals, programming, not the signals, the content was transported around between affiliate stations and whatnot over phone lines. So you could transfer video for tomorrow's show or whatever. But if you were transmitting live news broadcasts or whatever, anything you wanted to send over this phone network, it would, real time. The real video was kind of a lot to handle. And these were in the NTSC or probably using Betacam, commercial quality, broadcast quality cameras and recording devices and so on. So you're not talking just straight old 29.97 NTSC. There's probably overscan. There was all the trappings of the professional broadcast signal. So the AT&T wanted to be able to compress that down, but have it look good for broadcast. Now, anyone who has ever seen NTSC video projected, displayed on a nice shiny 4K, huge gamut, sRGB or whatever. So you got this 96% or something, just ridiculous color space, saturation. Maybe you're on a nice OLED display with some nice inky blacks, as they say. And you can see quite clearly that the NTSC color space, the joys of YUV, is not great. It left much to the future to fix. So there has to be some sort of a startup forming somewhere that will reimagine NTSC video of old using the magic of AI to adjust color spaces and to maybe upscale, or who knows. So at the time, AT&T was coming up with ways to compress video in real time, move it around. So True Vision, based in Indiana, would eventually acquire Rasterops, and I would join True Vision / Rasterops in Santa Clara. Rasterops was famously a graphic card and monitor company. I had worked at Supermac as my first job in Silicon Valley a few years earlier. Supermac and Radius would eventually merge. Rasterops would get bought by AT&T True Vision. I think it was a separate company, but so yeah, the days of especially Macintosh graphic cards were numbered. So were the days of NuBus, which is probably a good thing. Anyway, so a link to True Vision. You can continue reading if you're curious about the TARGA file format, TRG. I know there's a Wikipedia page specifically about TRG files. The TARGA 2000 hardware device was the thing that I worked on, specifically on codecs and basically debugging hardware in the lab. So it was a really good time, although I did not start that way when I first joined True Vision. So let us get into the story. In the beginning, I had just departed Apple. So I worked at Apple as my third job as a contractor, third job in Silicon Valley. So I started at Supermac. I worked there from July 15th or 17th, 1993 until, I want to say it was like October 1st, 1993, a short run, layoffs. I was on the list. Apparently, effort was made to try to save my job, but there was a person who was driving this layoff effort to cost reduce the operations of Supermac. His name was Lou Doctor. Hard to forget, Lou Doctor. So Lou Doctor held my future at Supermac in his hands, and he applauded, squashing my time down to zero. Hey, that's compression. So I would leave Supermac. I would work at Storm Technologies for 2 weeks. So it's not really a full, it was a 2-week contract gig. So it counts as a contracting gig, but not a ginormous step on my career path. So my next step after Supermac was working at Apple. I worked at Apple thanks to a referral by a guy named Dave, who I met at Supermac. This would be a pattern. So I interviewed at Apple. The Apple Quality organization, Apple Quality, was based in Mariani 1. I was working for a person named Ray, and I was working with Terry and Rob on the Power Macintosh upgrade card testing. So I was new to the Silicon Valley thing. I really didn't have any experience. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be a tester. This turned out to be kind of a weird choice that I probably should have argued with more, but in hindsight, it was actually fundamentally useful to begin my engineering career in the QA department. A lot to have learned. I've realized that over the years that people who don't do that, who think they understand it, are probably completely wrong. So I was working at Apple. I worked there for about a year. There was an 18-month cap. This was due to a lawsuit that had happened sometime before my time that was brought against, I don't know if it was Apple or Microsoft. I think it was like maybe it was a class action, or maybe it was just a worker uprising. And it was, hey, you can't treat us like employees sometimes, but pay us like contractors without benefits or all these other differences. So there was a lawsuit. So the resolution to that was you could only work at a company as a contractor for up to 18 months. Then you would have to disappear, wander in the wilderness for, I think, 6 months. And then you could return. So 18-month stints. And that was only, now if you were working on a project that came to an end, you were supposed to leave, even if it wasn't 18 months. So Apple basically, I guess to get around this or to manage their huge contractor pile, outsourced, and their main on-site contractor was Adia. There is a reason I'm telling so much backstory. So Adia, A-D-I-A, I don't even know if they're still around, one of many contract agencies that were operating in the Silicon Valley. And so I went to the Adia office and started my gig at Apple, working in Mariani 1. Met all kinds of characters, interesting people, smart people, weird people. Working on the Power Mac, upgrade card, all kinds of exposure to the Power Mac. Program the first 601 based PowerPC Macintoshes, Power Macs. So I was working in user level quality. Then when we were done with that, I went and did similar, what was it called? Oh no, I was doing applications. I was testing apps. Then I did user level quality, which was testing the Finder and the installation experience and all that for the Blackbird laptop, which was, I believe it was the 540, which was a 68040 maybe, 030 based laptop with an upgrade path. I don't know if it was user upgradable, but an upgrade path to PowerPC. Somehow, I can't remember the details, but this was the first laptop, certainly the first Apple product, with not a trackball, but a touch tablet thing, a little touchpad. So that was my first exposure to that, and I actually didn't like it. But because I was able to move between projects, but I was working for this third party, you get around the whole, you can only work there for one project, and then you have to leave, capped at 18 months, all that silliness. So I was like, okay, I learned about how you deal with contract agencies and working for a company as a contractor. And then one day I found out what the differential was. Like Apple was paying Adia. Well, I will tell you, I was making $22 an hour. Big dollars. I think Apple was paying Adia like $40 an hour, something ridiculous. I think it was almost 100% of, we were making the same money, and they were being paid basically to manage payroll and timesheets and just general recruiting and management of this flexible workforce and all that stuff. I was like, wow, that is a lot of money. It's a lot of money that they could be paying me. because I don't need all that, right? What did I know? So this will become a minor thing as we move along through the story. So one of my colleagues, like I said, Terry, was a woman. Terry, because Terry is a sort of an agnostic name. So Terry worked in our group. She was kind of an odd person, an odd character. Nice enough, but just a little weird, a little strange. But really, when you think about it, a lot of the people there, even the really smart people, were a little off. So I worked for the Blackbird group, and then I would move over to the API test group. So I was actually writing some code to run through test cases of the standard Apple toolbox, the APIs for, I was actually doing SCSI, Small Computer Systems Interface, the precursor to today's USB external drives and all that. So SCSI drives, so I was quite familiar at that point with how that was working, and some other stuff. And we would just run test code all the time, and there was a whole test harness. And fun fact, the person that was managing the tools development side, not the group manager, that was Merrill. Merrill had been at Apple from like day 3 or something. He was there forever. So Merrill, super cool guy, really nice, really laid back. The guy that was managing the tool set, the actual development of test code and all that, was quite literally Dan at Apple.com. So he was he was the guy. He did a ton of development on MaxBug, which was the Macintosh debugger. Just an all-around, you get a first name as your username at Apple, you probably have been around for a while. So interesting group, but after several months, I was like, you know what, I'm kind of getting a little stir crazy here. I had interviewed inside Apple to become a full-time employee, but I always got the same answer. You just don't have enough experience. And this was 1993, so the Bush recession was coming to an end. Silicon Valley was preparing itself for the ride of a lifetime. So it was an interesting time to be rejected. At least, I think it was about 3 times. Three real, like, multi-person interviews, going to lunch with with the hiring manager, all this posturing and whatnot. And I was always troubled because I was like, everything I've told you is on my resume. So if I don't have enough experience, it's because I have listed everything there. There were no secrets. And it's something you could have asked about right up front. So it was a little weird, but so I did try to get a full-time job at Apple. Turns out I'm probably better off that I didn't. I would probably still be at Apple today. No, probably not. So I departed Apple without a plan. In fact, someone asked me, so where are you going after this? And I said, I don't know. And they're like, really? You're leaving without, don't people normally leave on Friday and start their new job on Monday? And I said, I don't know. I'm not sure what I want to do. So it was about 6 weeks. I was looking more intently each week. Each passing week was another reminder, oh, you know what? I really should be making money again. I got into a bad habit at Apple. They would pay weekly. We got a weekly paycheck that was hand delivered from the Audia person. They would show up, only at Apple, I think. They would show up and sit in the lobby of each building. So there must have been multiple people. They would sit in the lobby, or they would go to some sort of well-known location, and you could just wander by. Now they would mail it to you later if you didn't accept it in person. We were paid every week. So you'd submit your timesheet, and then that timesheet was the check you received the following Thursday. So you were paid this week for last week. So that was really easy to get hooked on. And in fact, sometimes I would have 3 paychecks, I got to put these in the bank. So I had grown lazy. I wasn't really spending any money on anything. So I was still new to the game. Silicon Valley was still reasonably priced for normal people. So after a couple of weeks, though, I was like, you know what? I really gotta do something. So the person that I had been hired by at Supermac somehow had referred me to a headhunter. I think his name was Bo. And Bo referred me to, or he sent me over to a gig, a QA tester gig at True Vision. And when I went over there, it turns out that one of the people I'd be working with technically for as a test lead, but really with, was Terry from Apple. So I met with Terry, and I cannot remember the manager's name of the QA group. It was a very small, I think it was like 2 or 3 people, and that would have been with me, I think. Eventually it was Tyler, me, Stu, Terry, maybe one other person during my QA stint, and then that would change soon after. So after our interview, I was told that the fee that whomever it was who sent my resume over was going to price me out of the position. They really couldn't afford to pay what they felt they wanted to pay me and pay the agency per hour on top of that. It was going to be outside of their budget, but they really wanted to hire me. So they said, it's going to be up to you if you want to screw them over. So I contacted my first hiring manager from Supermac, who had referred me to this Bo character. And I said, here's the situation. I would like to work at True Vision. And he said, I will smooth things over with Bo. You should take the job, which I did. Now, part of the finagling was, hey, there was a person I already worked with was there. And so there was a question about who had reached out to me first, or how I ended up at True Vision to have this interview, who was really to receive the credit. That's a total hand wave, but there was no bad feelings that I'm aware of were harbored. So that was my first time going around the headhunter, and that was when that was the first, because at Apple with Adia, I was like, they're getting a lot of money, but I really didn't think about it. Here, it was like, hey, I almost didn't get this gig, which turned out to be pretty good, but I would not have gotten it had I stuck with, nope, I have to stick with this recruiter, this headhunter, this person who's making money on my money. So, an interesting time. So that wiggle room may have made some difference, but it was basically, well, I kind of knew the person anyway before, so there you go. Started out, once again, as a tester. Now, at the time, I had some very, very real concerns that I was being pigeonholed, as they say, or being branded. I was being assigned a future as just a tester. Oh, you're just a tester. And over the years, I've come to realize, first of all, that's profoundly stupid to have that attitude. But as well, I realized that the things that I learned as a tester made me a better developer. So it was both macro educational, but also micro educational for my own education, for my own, what do you call it? It was educational for my own skills, my place in the engineering community, I suppose. You learn quite a bit when you are, what I like to say is, you're an advocate for the user. You are filling the role of the person that this product or service is being developed for, and with the added benefit of receiving pay to find the problems before the real customers do, right? So it's a noble goal. And often the tester has to know a lot more about the product than the people developing it. And that has always been true in my travels. So I find that interesting that just a tester gets so quickly and easily discounted, but they probably know more about the product than you do, Mr. or Miss, Mrs., Ms., they, developer. You only know your little piece of it. And I use the entire thing from top to bottom. So that was something I would come to learn at True Vision. So the first 2 or 3, I was a tester. I was in quality assurance. I was using products as a user might. The API test experience at Apple was a good sort of stepping one foot into the other side, into the engineering side. So you were a little bit more credible when you would approach the engineering group and say, hey, I found this issue calling this API with these parameters. And they're like, oh, okay, so you kind of know what you're doing. If you were just a user, if you were just a normal person, you would get it works on my machine, or all manner of dodges, or, oh, you're just a tester. My favorite one I've heard here in Vegas was, well, aren't QA and engineering supposed to be adversarial? That person was a moron. So the Silicon Valley was still up and coming. Certainly things were happening at a breakneck pace. When I was at when I was at TrueVision, Linux.com, which was VA, I think. I cannot remember what that stands for. But Linux.com would go public. I think Netscape went public in 96. Was that true? Yeah. Let me do a quick. I'm going to check the notes. No, I didn't make notes on this. Netscape. NSCP no longer stands for Netscape. Netscape. Netscape is an ISP? Ooh, weird. Where's the company? Oh, they released... okay. So Netscape Navigator was released in 1994, but I think they went public... 1994... Where did they go public? So dumb. IPO, sorry. Oh, I'm thinking about editing this out, but this is real. This is me really looking up the history of Netscape IPO. How about that? If I could type. There we go. August 9th, 1995. So, 93, 94. It is likely that I was at TrueVision when they went public. So I remember we had an engineering meeting, or we had a product meeting, whatever it was, and someone came in, and I think Linux.com went public after. Yeah. So it was Netscape. So Netscape IPO, August of 1995. I remember, in fact, it was Chris, the director of engineering. I remember looking at him when he said, did everybody hear about Netscape going public today? It was a ridiculous amount of excitement and money and all that. So that was sort of the beginning of the .com boom. So I was there for that. So Silicon Valley was still very young. So starting out as a tester in this environment, there was a lot of chaos to come. This was the epicenter of that absolute chaos. And it was sometimes innovative chaos, but sometimes absolute ridiculousness. And if you ever watch Silicon Valley, the HBO show, you can get all of the chaos compressed down into one company of 4 people experiencing all variations of silly. So, but the good news is at TrueVision, thanks to Marshall, what was he? Like the senior developer or something? I don't think he was really in the titles, but he was one step below the director of engineering. He had his own office. So Chris and Marshall had their offices. If you know Apple Video, you will know who Marshall is. I think he's still at Apple. I was able to show off my engineering prowess, even though I didn't have the job role, but I was doing engineering things. So Marshall one day said, "Hey, do you want to be in engineering?" And I think it's when we started doing, I think I was sitting in the lab, and we were trying to figure out why we were dropping frames on some video transfers. And it turns out, fun fact, Apple had implemented its own version of NuBus, which was a Texas Instruments specification. Today, everybody uses PCIe. Probably you as a casual person are using version 3. I think version 5 is already on the horizon. So PCIe was coming. PCI was already a radical new thing. But before PCI, there was all manner of ISA, and Apple had chosen NuBus, and NuBus was its own collection of oddities, including byte lane swizzling. But there were occasions where the TrueVision, the TARGA 2000, TrueVision eventually, TARGA 2000 board would be transferring data, and it would stutter, drop frame, etc. So we sat in the lab with a logic analyzer. We were watching NuBus transfers, and so I'm just a tester. Except that, we developed a NuBus board in college. We designed it in one semester and debugged it in the second semester, and it all worked and all that. So, so you're familiar with the NuBus ridiculousness. So I was sitting in the lab with Marshall, and I want to say Victor. I think I'm still connected to both of them on LinkedIn. So we're looking at the screen and we're like, wait a minute, why? So if you look through the spec for NuBus, you will find that it can do normal arbitrated transfers of some number of blocks of data. So you're going to I want to send 1 byte, I want to send 16 bytes, whatever it was. And then you would re-arbitrate for the bus. So you would say, give me the bus. I need to transfer some data, and another device might be transferring data. So it says, hang on, I'm still transferring my data. So you once that device is done with its allotted transfer window, you re-arbitrate for the bus, you get your bus, and you transfer some data. So the new bus had these two modes called burst and block, where you could burst data and you could have larger blocks, I think it was. And it's been a long time since I've thought about this, but burst and block transfers, you could say, hey, I want to transfer this block of data, but I also want to transfer another one right after it. And so there was a way that you could pre-arbitrate for much more data to be transferred. You basically say, hey, I'm going to be hanging out here on the bus for a while. And I don't remember the mechanics of the arbitration process, but you could basically say, I'm going to burst and block transfer. Don't bother me. And you could send a bunch of data across. So if you're capturing real-time video, 720 by 480, uncompressed, probably not, but you're transferring this huge amount of data, you don't want to be arbitrating and, worst case, not getting the bus, so that you're sitting there with data accumulating on the other side of the new bus. Okay, so we're watching all this happen. We're like, hey, why is it arbitrating every time? And why are these pauses? Like, it was literally going, we're not going to transfer your data. So it was really an interesting experience for my resume, for my job skill set, whatever. And it was a positive interaction with Marshall. So he said, hey, do you want to be in engineering? You seem to be so inclined. So, like, yeah, sure. So it wasn't a big move. It was an org chart change. I think there was a little bit more money, but it was like, yeah, you should come to the engineering meetings, not be writing test cases and doing all this. So I moved over to engineering. So as it happens, I had learned a lot about video capture. I really didn't know anything about drop frames, about scan rates, about interlace, about analog video signaling. There's a special scope, which I don't remember the name of it, but so if you have an analog NTSC broadcast signal coming in, you can actually see that it's okay, that it's within spec. You can look on this meter and see that the signals are where they're supposed to be and all that. And then we would capture, we would digitize. There was a part on the TARGA 2000 board that would move field data around, so you could do these block operations on the really fast memory bus on the board, kind of like GPUs today. So you had this processor on the other side of the bus that could move memory around efficiently and could do all sorts of transformations. It could apply codecs, compressor, decompressor blocks. So you could have a frame or a field come in, you could compress it, store it in memory, move it across the bus. Probably the thing that they should have had was a SCSI direct interface so that they wouldn't have to go over to bus, so they could stream directly to a RAID drive, but that was not the case. So you compress your frame or fields and you send them across. Pretty neat. So I learned all about this. QuickTime was the Apple kind of standard for video content container, and then how the codecs worked and all manner of things. I had learned a little bit about Quick Draw when I was at Supermac. So here I was learning about QuickTime. Make it quick. So it was a pretty reasonable introduction during my QA window. And then when I became engineering, I was hitting the ground running, as they say. So one day, very soon after, like I was literally, hadn't even checked out the development environment, so that everything was in Projector. If you're an Apple developer of old, you know that Projector was essentially, I don't know if it was CVS, but it was basically RCS or CVS like, and it was tied intimately to MPW, the Macintosh Programmers Workshop. So it was their version of a programmer shell. It wasn't really an IDE, it was a sort of a shell with some tools, command line. You could run make files, you could do command line builds, so on and so on. So we had everything was checked into Projector, all the tools, everything. So you could literally check out a complete build environment, compiler, sources, everything. Okay, so Marshall came into my cube. He's like, hey, let's get you up and running so you can do some development. And he said, so while everything was being checked out over the network, blazing fast, and by the way, shout out to the guy, Robin, at True Vision, who made everything work in that building. No doubt managed our projector instance and and everything, networking, helped prepare for trade shows, everything. If he didn't have a cape, he probably left it at home so he wouldn't distract people. But so yeah, while I was checking out, he said, so we have this project that we might work on with Sony in Japan. So we might need someone to go to Japan, but we need someone to sort of be the point person on, exploring the project, doing some prototyping and so on. Would you be interested? And I was like, I've never been to Japan. I've never even left the country. And he's like, well, you can get a passport and all that stuff. But if you're interested, then, there will be a meeting and we'll talk about what the project is. So I was like, yeah, sure. So that was probably a seminal moment in my overarching career path and where my interests would be and all that. So when I joined the engineering group, got my stuff checked out, took on this project, that was the beginning of the beginning. It was a TARGA 2000 integration with what Sony was working on, DV Pro, which was their digital video editing, content authoring platform, tool set, whatever. And they wanted to have an editing station that could be reasonably portable for use at live sporting events or maybe even live news reporting. So it was basically going to be a van, a news van or something with an editing bay, and the DV Pro editing station would be there with 2 displays. So, left and right, or A and B, how I think it's, I can't remember how you refer to them, but you could do phase between them, etc. So you'd have 2 inputs, and then you would have the mix, however they were being mixed to the output, and it was going to be based on the TARGA 2000. And what we were going to do is split fields. So you'd have, as I mentioned, the board worked in fields, not frames. So in the first pass, the first demo was going to put 1 field on each of the screens, so you could move this field data around. So you would say, oh, okay, so we have a field of this and a field of that, and you could mix between them, because on a small screen, to the casual observer, you're not really going to notice that you're only seeing 1 field per frame time, right? So it was totally functional at the time. So given the hardware that was available, what they were trying to accomplish, it was great. It worked great. So the next thing was to actually start prototyping this, because that was later in the story. We started discussing the spec. We arrived at this 2-field solution path, started doing some experiments, started talking to Ron, the Senior Vice President of Asia Pacific Sales. It was with Ron that I would be traveling to Japan in some number of months. It turned out, I don't remember when I started. I want to say it was maybe 2 months. I would be traveling to Japan, staying there for a week, and the day that I landed was the day that my sister was graduating from college. So that was May 15th or something. That was a fun day. I arrived, switched luggage, got back on a plane, flew to Phoenix. So this is something I would do later when I was working for Intel too. Like, oh, I get to be home for 5 minutes, get back on a plane. So I was prototyping my side of the integration, which was to make the TARGA 2000 work with this change in mode of how data was going to be moved around and moved to the host system to be displayed on the monitor and 2 monitors or displays, whatever. So anyway, all this stuff was coming together on my side, and I really didn't have much interaction at a technical level with the Sony side. They didn't know who I was. So all the Sony interactions were through Ron, and that's all I knew. So I would go and get my passport and all this, and that's another episode entirely. But the trip to Japan would be my first venture adventure outside of the country, as long as we don't bring up my one trip to Tijuana. No, I went there twice, but my 2 trips to Tijuana when I was in college. Good times. Only stayed there for the day, but Tijuana. So that the actual trip to Japan, the actual world travel, is a story unto itself. When I arrived in the offices of Sony, so it was one day of the week that we spent there, we had some introductions, the typical exchange of business cards in a hierarchy, the whole protocol, very, very proper and professional. I was left in a room. Now we had a translator. His name was Bucho-san, Jim Butler. So Bucho-san, Ron was Udo-san, and I, as luck would have it, I don't know how this worked out, but I was Hugo-san. So they actually used all 4 letters of my name in order. Hugo-san. So Bucho-san was not versed at all in any sort of technology. He was purely about business translation. You want to talk about contracts? He got you. You want to talk about struct versus union? No idea. So his part of the introduction when I was left in this room, so they had a little computer set up with the hardware and a development station and whatnot. And one person, one colleague on the Sony side was sitting there. He really didn't speak English. Now, most of the older Japanese people that were in the meeting with Ron spoke English. And here's where I learned this fun fact. This is not bad. Most of the people in those business meetings spoke English just fine. But they really wanted to hear the translator. So they wanted to hear the person say it. They wanted to hear what the translator would say. They wanted to be able to discuss amongst themselves. They wanted to be able to kind of watch. So it was really a sort of a negotiation tactic. Not awful, but something to be aware of. So, but in my case, the actual colleague, my Sony counterpart, did not speak enough English for us to have any sort of useful engineering discussion. He was polite and friendly. There was no issue there. And Bucho-san was completely unable to help. So he kind of shrugged his shoulders and says, I don't know what you guys are talking about. So we were left with one keyboard, one computer, and a working TARGA setup. And he had some software already written that was working for their part. But here was the cool part. He had started with an Apple QuickTime developer sample application. So he had the sample code, and that was his starting point. So he took that code and changed it and made it work as an initial kind of proof of concept, or MVP, if you like, minimally viable product, demo version 1. As luck would have it, I did something similar. So I took that sample code with the codec components, and I altered the handling of the data coming through the codec so that it would split fields out, so that we would actually be able to select one field rather than a full frame and do with it as we pleased. So my part of the integration, according to this plan we had, was working, and his part on their side, on the DV Pro editing station side, was also working. So we both started from the same starting point, and we both made our respective changes to make our side of the overall plan work. So we were sitting at this keyboard trying to figure out, like, okay, how are we going to, and then I can't remember which of us was looking, and kind of there was this moment of realization. I'm like, oh, you started with the same code that I did. And from there, it was quite painless, to be honest. I mean, all things considered, it was alarmingly quick and easy. So I went down the hallway. You know, we got it sorted. We got our code merged and integrated and functioning. We literally passed the keyboard back and forth, so we were maybe arguably doing some extreme programming. But passing this thing back and forth, getting our code out, kind of, oh, yes, okay, and then you change this. Yeah, okay. So we really just had to point. It was C code. There's a very limited vocabulary of C reserved words, and he stuck with the function names. Luckily, he used normal quote unquote normal ASCII. Well, ASCII is fine. No, an American friendly character set. I, being American, did not have anything to offer other than my my one language only, please, policy. So once we got everything running, I wandered down the hallway to the meeting room, and while I was writing these notes, I was thinking, I wonder how that was taken, that I would just stick my head in on this meeting. I didn't really follow any protocols or anything. I just stuck my head in. I looked at Ron and said, do you want to see a demo? We got it working. And he was like, what? So they all wandered down to the little room. Actually, I think it was a big room, but we were sitting at a table in a space. I don't remember it being like a lab, but it was some sort of a workspace. So it was not in a common area. They had an open floor plan. So it was away from noise and distraction. So they came down the hallway, came in, showed the demo. And I understand that this led to some positive business developments and discussions after. I wasn't really part of that. So I did my part, got it working with my counterpart. That in itself was very educational. Just being able to work with people you just met and get stuff working, and professional plus friendly equals progress, I guess. So yeah, that worked out pretty well. It was I would say, from my perspective, a great experience, and I think it went okay for that part of the True Vision business relationship with Sony. True Vision would have its own things going on, unfortunately, in the world. So got back to the home office. Like I said, I went to my sister's graduation party. I missed the actual commencement, but she graduated from college, and everybody was at my parents' house, so I made it there, and good times were had. I think I had been awake for like 36 hours or something. So I got there, hanging out, and then I went to sleep, and I understand that I slept for 12 hours, if I recall correctly. So that's a long time to be asleep for me. Then I would go back. Oh, and by the way, this was, I was working, I had not been transitioned to like full-time employee. So I was in engineering, but as a contractor, because it was like immediately when it's like, you're going to be in engineering, get your tools checked out. Oh, by the way, you're going to Japan. So I don't even know, maybe it was a month. I can't remember how long I had. It was a pretty quick schedule. So I would not become a full-time employee of True Vision until I returned from Japan. So I was in Japan so they paid for everything. And I was billing by the hour. So I said, hey, Ron, what's the right thing? What do I charge here? You guys paid for the hotel. So I'm not billing like 24 hours a day for sleeping in a hotel you paid for. So I said, what do you think is fair? And he's like, you write down a number and I will sign it, whatever you want. So I guess things did go pretty well. So I seem to remember doing something like 10 hours a day or something. I was like, well, it was a lot, but it was not 24 hours. Like I was trying to be able to sleep at night. So my Harvey Mudd ethics were maybe an element of that final decision on my part. But anyway, yeah. So I received a nice chunk of change for my efforts. There was some apparent success. That was all good. Came back. Probably based on this outcome, I got a job offer to work as a full-time employee of True Vision, which I accepted for a time. True Vision itself was going through some pains. There was some odd politics with our on-site electronics assembly group. So this was clearly back in the old days. We had probably like a dozen assembly folks, assembly line, electronics assembly production. So they would build boards, right? So we would get fabs back from Silicon Valley, by the way, had everything you would need to do all this. So having in-house assembly was not unusual. It would be ridiculous today. Nobody does this anymore. They send it out, right? But we had an in-house group. I think they were not pleased with how much work they had to do and their compensation or something. Netscape. That would be later. True Vision was itself having some interesting times. The graphic card market had already consolidated. What's going on in the video space? Now, there was a market for garage video producers, right? Like home office. I'm going to do small time, independent. We had some samples that were built for UPN. So they would build a commercial, promotional, UPN at the time, back in the old days. The Frog, I think it was, Dancing Frog or something. So we would see some of the work that people were doing with it. It was pretty neat. It was a good time, but it was also an interesting time, and that's not always good. There was also some strife, minor but still present, between. So the company was having some times, and the engineering team would always get a free meal. So I think it was a free lunch on Fridays, and we would have a meeting in our engineering meeting room, which was just a room with a whiteboard and a big table. But we would have our meetings in there, and we'd have lunch catered. So the lunch would be delivered to the front reception room. And then someone, more often me, I don't know how I got that duty, someone would go down and get, I think we had like a wheeled cart of some sort. So we'd go down and get the various items that were delivered. It was either like covered aluminum trays or bag, maybe it was sandwiches or whatever it was, right? So throw it on this cart, go in the elevator, go back up. So you'd end up passing through, because engineering was in the back of the building, upstairs, second floor of 2. So you'd walk by everybody, including through accounting, right? So they knew, well, they're like, oh, there's their free food again. And there was like negative feelings. There was this like, why do they get all the food? And this was also educational, because what you end up with is this elitist subgroup that is being coddled. Like, why do they get free food and we don't? And my take home, which I've always described this to people in general, yes, you can say, well, engineering is the one making the products, but everyone else who's not in engineering, they're not just hanging out looking at the ceiling, right? Everybody is doing a part of the overall essential process of operating a company. So accounting or assembly or shipping and receiving. I think they had one person shipping and receiving. IT, network support, Marcom, sales, all these people. Like, no one is specifically less important than engineering in an engineering-driven company, because without them, these products are not going to build themselves. They're not going to sell themselves. They're not going to be, our network is not going to just make itself work. So all of the supporting organizations, all the groups and departments and people, individuals, were treated as though they were just not in engineering. But I said, that's ridiculous, because without them, there would be no engineering. So I became a really strong proponent of, like, we're all in this together kind of thing. Now, this is not to, and by the way, this is where I've kind of formed my own opinions on what it means to be, to have equal pay. Like, on the one hand, everybody's important, but on the other hand, now, so free food based on department, that's a bad look. But if you want to hire a person with a very specific skill set, right? They hired me in engineering. I had not done these things before. So I kind of proved myself, still as a sort of a junior engineer at the time. Production by a street. Hope that person's okay. So I was, market rate. But if the inventor of video was going to be hired, that person might be paid more because of we need this person in the group, and we need to pay more than the other person at the other company, and so on. So valuing your employee, contractor, workforce, the people that make the company go, make the products work, make the customer experience what it is, et cetera, whatever you're building and doing. This was an interesting view very early in my career, like, I'm 3 years out of college at this point. It was interesting to see where the people doing the job roles, doing the tasks, filling the roles, and making the different interconnected systems work in a company. True Vision was not a overwhelmingly successful company as would eventually play out. But it was a going concern. It was acquired. So it was a Rastrops acquisition. Rastrops was acquired. It was a TrueVision acquisition of Rastrops. And here's a fun fact. Remember I mentioned I was laid off from Supermac and that one person held my future at Supermac in his hands. And who do you suppose the CEO of TrueVision was? Yes, indeed, Lou Doctor. So when I think it was after I came back from Japan, I was speaking to Lou. I'm trying to remember where I actually had someone, he was like, hey, that was a good thing. Everything worked out and all that. I said, so I don't know if you remember me. He goes, oh, I do. I know. And he's like, so I guess guess things have worked out and we're all happy you're here and all that. So platitudes. But I always found that sort of humorous that that worked out that way. So odd politics in assembly, some weird bad feelings about the elitist engineering organization. And then we were finding out that TrueVision was not quite treading water. So it was not looking brilliant, even though the TrueVision product was very highly regarded. And if you were familiar at the time with Pinnacle and very specifically Avid made some very, very expensive video editing bays and tools and so on. So the TARGA 2000 was an intimate part of that tool chain, that stack of tools and software and hardware. So there are people, even to this day, if they're in video editing at all, if I say TARGA 2000, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, I remember. Oh, you were working on that? So it was a little bit niche, but so the TARGA 2000 Rockstar, TrueVision as a company, treading water, maybe. So the half of the company that was the original TrueVision in Indiana was probably almost the same size. Lou figured, hey, we should bring everybody to Silicon Valley so that the people and I cannot remember when this was in the overall timeline, if I was in engineering or if I was in QA, but it didn't matter. They brought everyone from Indiana, families, employees, to Santa Clara. And I have to imagine this was the more expensive direction. Like we could have gone to Indiana, probably could have had everybody there for half the total expense, right? So the entire Indiana team comes out to Santa Clara for at least a week. We have a luau style event in the back. The company literally had a backyard. It was on Walsh, down the street from an Intel office, Walsh Avenue off of Lawrence Expressway. If anybody remembers that area, it was a bunch of what are they called? Flip up style. It was a big, nondescript office buildings with logos for different companies. So we were on Walsh literally off of Central Expressway. That was my favorite part. I could drive from my apartment down Central to the exit just across from, past Lawrence, next exit, directly right into the cross Walsh into the parking lot. Great commute. So somehow we had like a backyard with grass and stuff. So we had Kailua pig and we had the whole nine. And I was barbecuing teriyaki chicken and I was sampling they somehow got an entire keg of Stoddard's Porter, which was one of my favorite beers at the time, a little brew pub called Stoddard's in downtown Sunnyvale. So we had a keg of this stuff and everybody said, this is too dark. So people would come up and hey, Dan, you want another porter? So they're bringing me red Solo cups and I'm standing over this hot barbecue because who amongst us has worked at McDonald's? I can, no problem. So I'm cooking teriyaki chicken and I'm drinking Stoddard's Porter and I'm doing both back and forth. And who knows how long that went on, but eventually Robin, who I mentioned earlier, gave me a ride home. He said, you're definitely not driving home. So he gave me a ride home. The next morning I walked back to TrueVision. I just mentioned I didn't live very far away and got my car. So everything worked out. The connection with the other part of the company was very useful. I think it was probably an effort to make sure that the company, the personnel were working together in this interesting time. I literally had a conversation with Lou in his office about my observations about why is engineering getting free food, walking past the accounting people, and they're like, oh, I guess they're more important than us. They know the money, they know what's being spent. Why is engineering being treated differently? Anyway, so we had interesting conversations, and I think he did take them seriously. However, it wasn't helping. Like, there was no magic, like, oh, we all know each other now. Now, I will say it did make intra-company communications, inter-office, right? The Santa Clara office, the Indiana office. I cannot remember what city they were in. Anyway, so somewhere in Indiana. It makes a difference when you know the person, when you've hung out with them for a couple days in person. So intra-company communications, inter-office cooperation, etc., was a little bit easier. It was a little bit more human. It was nice. So that I don't think that was harmful in any way. But I don't think the trajectory of True Vision was altered by much, even with those efforts. So Chris was our director of engineering. I mentioned he's the one that announced or pointed out the Netscape IPO. I don't remember when Linux.com went public when I was at UMax. That would come later. So Chris, as director of engineering, decided, or whatever, to not be the director of engineering anymore. So he moved to a dotted line, probably, filled in some solo projects. I think he was trying to track down some reported field failures of one of the old Rasros video cards. So he went through the history of hardware revisions and found the one case where a resistor value was changed, or it was really some minor thing. But he was essentially slow walking out the exit, and I don't know what the politics of that were, but he was moving on, and I would run into Chris later at the Newton group at Apple, so soon after, because I would leave True Vision to go work in the Newton group. And then I would run into him again at Palm, where he was a battery engineer. So he was making sure the Coulomb counter and the charging circuitry and the battery chemistry and everything were all up to snuff back in the user serviceable battery, a mobile device days. So they brought in a new engineering director. His name was Yoram. He was I was going to say menacing, but that's not true. But he was a tall Israeli man, very strong character, very strong appearance. So his introduction to the group was a team meeting in that room I mentioned. Now all of engineering could, if you stood up in your cubicle, you could literally have the meeting that way. That's how, like, everybody's cubicle was, the greatest distance between the two ends of the engineering area department and the building was, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6, 7 of those standard Herman Miller cubes, maybe 8. So you could have like a raised voice standing meeting, just in everybody's in their cubicles. So we always were talking or interacting. There was really the formality of a real sit down meeting in a meeting room was more. It was more of a synchronization effort. Like, we'll all be in one room, one whiteboard, sync up. It was a sit down meeting, not even a stand up meeting. Could have done a stand up, may have been better. So the reason I'm describing this is because you were essentially talking all the time. So the fact that the meeting was at 9 a.m. on Thursday or whatever it was not, it was never treated as a hard start time. That would change because Yoram did not have this experience. He was new in a managerial role. So he sat in the room at 9 o'clock, probably looking at his watch. I don't remember. Every single one of us was completely and totally tuned in to walking over to the meeting room around 9. So it would take you a minute. If someone interrupted, or, especially Marshall would be, it's amazing sometimes that he made it all the way to the bathroom and back without having 10 mini meetings with various people. Yeah. Oh, Marshall, I can't talk right now. But so Marshall was the farthest away from the meeting room. So as everybody is kind of meandering, or they're starting a conversation, so they're waiting for, oh, you want to, anyway, so it was a meandering. I will walk to the 9 o'clock meeting. I will get up from my chair and begin the trek, the 150 feet to the meeting room. So Yoram is basically simmering, eventually boiling over. So 9:05 or so, and there's like 8 or 10 people total, 2 hardware layout guys, software people, Ray, the kernel, he was running he was the architect of the kernel code running on the TARGA 2000, Eric, and this other guy, I think his name was James, Marshall, of course, Chris. So anyway, this group, it was about 8 people, I think, 8 or 10. So we're all sitting there, and he says, Yoram says, you are not wasting your time when you are late to a meeting. You are wasting the time of everyone attending the meeting. So even though you think you're 2 minutes late, multiply that by the 10 people in here. So you have wasted 20 minutes. So he was upset about this. And over the years, I mean, at the time, you're like, who's this guy? But it turns out he is completely and totally, absolutely 100% correct. And so if I had to make a list of things that were useful, high value learning experiences, which coincidentally I'm going to do at the end of this episode, that's on there. So it was useful. He was an interesting character. I have seen him on LinkedIn. I don't believe we are connected. I hate LinkedIn, by the way, but the social graph, or the network connections between various people, can be useful. 90% of my network is unresponsive, though, so diminishing utility over time. I would leave TrueVision and go back to Apple, ironically, perhaps. TrueVision was getting weird, as I mentioned, so it was not looking like a trajectory going up. The Silicon Valley was it was hopping. Things were going on, snapping your fingers. It was an exciting, interesting time. If you were going to pick a time when Silicon Valley really started to take off, it was right around the time I got there. Coincidence? Probably not. It was obviously a transition in political party and executive leadership of the country. The Clinton years would begin. It was a full introduction of venture capital into the Silicon Valley. I was going to say marketplace, but I don't know. The Silicon Valley universe. Before that, there was venture capital, but here was we can just start taking risks on everything, and there will be some winners and some losers. And so there was money flowing. There were people starting companies based on napkin business plans, all those stories. So to me, it made very little sense to feel as though I was stuck. I think there was on returning from Japan and taking the full-time job, but then having the interactions with everybody in the company that I talked to and seeing where things seemed to be headed, and my interactions with Lou Doctor, which, while generally positive, were not overly encouraging. So I actually had a meeting with him. Let me give you an indication. They set up an anonymizing, thanks Robin, they set up an anonymizing email account so that if you sent email to this account, it would strip your sender information, so they wouldn't know who it was from. It would be completely anonymized, and this is a small company, and Robin did this, and Robin was a stand-up guy, so there was no chicanery. It was an actually anonymized email, and these emails would go directly to the CEO, Lou Doctor, so you could express concerns, opinions, thoughts, complaints, whatever you wanted to. That's where things were. So I sent an email to Lou, and I think it actually went through his assistant, but he read it, indicating my concerns. And one of my colleagues, I think I didn't include him in the total, Jose Yepes, super nice guy, very quiet, but also shocked. Like, you sent it without the anonymizing? And I said, yeah. He was from Peru, I think. So his mannerisms were very timid. He was not a timid person, but the way he expressed some things seemed timid. So he was like, "You didn't send it. They're going to fire you, man." I was like, I don't think so. So no, he was not correct. But I did reach out directly, and I said, yeah, I could anonymize it, but my opinions are mine. I'm not going to hide behind an anonymized Dropbox, feedback opinion box or whatever. So we had our conversation, and Lou accepted all of my concerns, didn't necessarily disagree with anything. He said, I'll tell you what, let's meet again in 30 days and see where things are, see if anything's improved or changed, see if things are headed in the right direction. And if they're not, then, if you want to move on to the next company, I will wish you the best. So we gave 30 days. And this is actually where, with very few exceptions, I always gave at least 30, sometimes 60 days notice when I intended to depart from a workplace. So we had this discussion. There were 30 days. We had our second meeting, and I was kind of feeling like things were not headed in the best direction. For me personally, the company sort of, but that was his job, was to drive the company. Mine was to look out for my future. So we parted on good terms, and I would, one of my colleagues who joined after me at True Vision, Tyler, said, I have a friend at Netcom. They're hiring. So I went and talked to this guy. I went and saw the NOC, the Network Operations Center for Netcom.com. I've done an episode previously when I registered my own domain. I was a Netcom customer. They kind of sucked, so I became a best.com customer. Production by a street. And best was kind of annoying to me, so that's when I registered my own domain name. So I was a best customer at this time. I would go, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I would register my own domain shortly after this interval of time. So I went to Netcom, had my interview with them. They were really looking for a network operations person who would be on call, who would get on a plane and fly out to what's called a network POP, a point of presence. So Netcom had different POPs around the country. So if you were dialing into a POP, this is back in the dial-up days, so you had your modem dialing into Netcom. So you might need to go fly out to Michigan or Alabama or whatever. They had POPs all over the place. I was like, So this was not at all engineering. It was really, I don't mean to diminish this, but it was an IT role. Now it'd be called like DevOps or just ops, operations, network ops, net ops, things like this. So I was like, it would be kind of fun, I think, but then it would probably be grueling and the pay would not be great. And then I had another opportunity thanks to because of a colleague that I had met in the Apple quality group. She was a test lead or a testing manager or something, a peer to my manager, Ray. Her name was Linda, also known as Spike. If you know Spike, then you know who that is. So she said, I cannot remember how I contacted her, or if she reached out to me, or if it was through Dave, who sent my resume over to Apple initially. But at the end of the day, it was an opportunity to, hey, they're looking for somebody who could do C++ development on the Newton with the new SDK they're working on, Software Developer Kit. So Spike gave my resume to another Dave, and I went and had an interview, and everybody I talked to was like, yeah, sounds good. So, and by the way, the Newton group is where I would meet Alex, which is how I would end up at Palm later and Jawbone. So Alex, yeah. So I took the job in the Newton group, and I had a tiny little office. My first office mate, and when I say office, I mean it was a broom closet with some Herman Miller, half an L desk, enough for two people and some space between. So my office mate, Neil Redding, who has become quite the public speaker now. We are connected on LinkedIn, if I recall. So Neil was there. I walked in. Hi, today's my first day. So I was working with Neil in the Newton group, and I started my journey into the personal digital assistant space, mobile device electronics, PCM, CIA, how do smart cards fit into all that. I learned Newton script. For those who don't know, Newton script is based on the language Self, which is also an inspiration for JavaScript. So by learning NewtonScript, when I would eventually work at Netscape, I was talking to Brendan one day, and I said, JavaScript looks a lot like NewtonScript. And he said, yes, that's a good observation. You're correct. I did take inspiration from Self. And so the sort of object frames, parent, proto-inheritance, all that. So some similar stuff, similar constructions. They're obviously not identical, but enough to be noticeable. And it was something that Brendan was like, oh, yes, you are correct. So that was interesting to have that experience to bring forward into my later. This is something I would learn also here at this time frame, was the stuff that you're learning now may solve the issues or address the project concerns or whatever that you're working on now, but the learning part could be applied to just about anything in the future. So that was valuable. So one of the things that I didn't care for at True Vision towards the end of my tenure there was the time that people, so I mentioned that they brought the Indiana team over. So it was a pretty close-knit company on the whole, given that it was in two separate distant locations, and that the company itself was kind of having some internal, almost like family disagreement. It wasn't like empire building. It was just more like, how come they get to do this? And he's looking at me funny. But eventually there became this trend, like people stopped talking or hanging out or being sort of, I hate to use the term work family because that's not really healthy, but it just seems like things got more and more sterile at work. Unless there was a going away lunch, then people would interact like, oh, now that we're not at work, we can talk like humans. And these were happening more frequently. So I made that observation to Lou. I said, the only time we are talking is when people are leaving and we're having these going away lunches. And he agreed. And I had, these were happening more and more, people in the engineering department and others. And eventually it was my turn. So I was leaving. And so that was sort of telling. I think it's an obvious indication, a learning experience to take into the future when your workplace becomes chilly, if you will, right? When people stop enjoying being there and when they only socialize when people are leaving. I'm not saying that's an exact checkbox to watch out for, but these are the sorts of things you start to wonder, like, how come this is happening? So I think this was one of those things that they, even if they did notice it, they didn't know quite what to do about it, but they didn't do anything about it. So True Vision would eventually be acquired by Pinnacle. As I mentioned, Pinnacle would be acquired by Avid, and there you go. So the takeaways from me, why do I tell these stories? Because there's usually some sort of take-home lesson and take wherever you want. So the takeaways here, I could have worked at Netcom. I could have stayed at Apple for another 6 months. Maybe I would have gotten hired. If there are opportunities, if it's a desert, then I probably would have done things very differently. Presented with the possibilities, I wanted to pursue what I would liked to do. I didn't want to be stuck in the pigeonhole of being a tester, even though it was fine, even though I found it educational for myself, even though, as I mentioned, being a tester can go one of two ways. And by the way, I'll say, when I worked at Apple, in the Power Macs were such a big deal. They were like, you got a pen? Do you want to work here at Apple? They were hiring a ton of people just to click and drag and type and open and close and whatever, like all levels of testing, because changing from, and by the way, Apple had already done the 6502 to 68000 change. The products were not intended to be compatible, of course, the Apple II and Apple III versus the Lisa and the Macintosh, right? So they were two different product lines, but here they were transitioning the processor so that things would continue to work on the Macintosh platform. So that was a pretty ridiculous risk at the time. They pulled it off for the most part. So they were just hiring anyone. And it did two things for me personally. One, there were people calling themselves QA engineers, like, yeah, I have an English degree and I'm a QA engineer. And I kind of took that personally. So like, dude, I have an engineering degree and I don't even call myself an engineer. This is, testing. I was young. But I wanted to and was able to, luckily, pursue things that I wanted to do in a circumstance, the Silicon Valley rise to the .com boom window. So as things were heating up, I was able to take advantage of that. I learned a great deal about a great many things, working with very different people on different types of projects and so on. So this was the beginning. It all began technically when I said, you know what, I don't like working here at Apple. Went and got this gig at TrueVision, screwed over a headhunter mildly, transitioned from testing to engineering, traveled outside the country for the first time of many eventually through my career. So got my passport, left the country, had a project going with people in another country with a modicum of success. And then went on to another thing that I was interested in, and then another one after that. So it was interesting to sort of seize the day. If it didn't work out, I think at the time, I always tell people I had an answering machine. Yes, that long ago. And it got to be a little bit silly in the time frame when I was at Netscape. So this was closer to 96, 97. There would be, my favorite one was somebody actually set up an interview for me without even asking. So they just said, hey, you have an interview Thursday, whatever. Like, okay, I'm not going, which I didn't. So it was an interesting time. I don't have 20 years at one company, which some people do, but I do have substantial and varied experience, very educational, but also very practical. Practical is a good word. So I'm glad I did that. And TrueVision was essentially technically when I left Apple as a contractor, but essential fulcrum of this, or maybe more of like the elbow in a chart, right? Where there's an inflection point, if you like. So a very obvious course adjustment into like, I should be taking advantage of all this opportunity here in the Silicon Valley. So I was able to do that. So I think TrueVision was an instrumental part of that realization, or yeah, that's probably a good word. That inflection, certainly. I learned not only when I went to Japan, but also the Indiana meetups, right? So before the Indiana side of the company had come to Santa Clara, and we had I think it was a full week. It might have been like 9 or 10 days. So before that, I knew some of these people, email. Yeah, there was a directory. You could see who was in charge of this or that or whatever. But once you meet them, once you've had a day or two or, some fun time, some social time, I want to say people went to Great America, probably went, up to the Bay, up to San Francisco. The tip of the Bay was in Sunnyvale, so they could have gone there, but so they probably went up to Peninsula. Who knows? Everybody had this the full week, and their family was there. The family could do whatever they wanted. We had the luau day, so it was very fun. So you got to know the people as people, engaging in social and work activities and conversations and so on. So I think everything was different after, and I think had TrueVision done a few other things differently, the value of that becoming acquainted across the distance, that value would have been much more easily seen and would have turned into more. But the circumstances were just not favorable at the time. So that's too bad. Similarly, going to Japan and working directly, sitting next to my counterpart who could not communicate with me, we would, given the technology at the time, we would probably not have been able to so easily share a screen. Sort of ironic given what TrueVision's mission was when it was founded. But today you can very easily use there are any variety of live editing session tools for pick your favorite programming editor / IDE. VS Code has what is it called? Not live server. Is it live server? Do I have VS Code running? Yeah, I do. What is it called? There's Get Live, which I have used, but not lately. And I think it's called, live server. No, not live server. What is it called? Live Share. So Live Share is a Microsoft extension to VS Code that allows you to do something similar. So if we could have sat in our respective cubes, offices, whatever, and shared our code and hacked on some stuff and watched a cursor and values change and all that. It might have been interesting, but the fact that we were able to sit next to each other, not even speaking the same language, but we're able to get this demo integrated and working in the space of an hour, 90 minutes, whatever it was, proved to be truly valuable. I'm not going to say invaluable, but I'm going to say that the efficiencies of interpersonal cooperation, but when those people don't really know each other, but they've spent time together, so they kind of know each other. They know of each other. They've been acquainted. That value is difficult to sort of enumerate, but I think it's easy to lose, I guess. If you never meet the people that you're working with, you won't be able to measure it. What I'm trying to say is, I don't know that people truly value the in-person component of collaboration. So there, especially post-pandemic, there's, we can just do video conferencing. We don't need to travel anywhere. To which I would say, I think you can travel less. For example, I went to Japan once. The team from Indiana, the half of the company, came to Santa Clara en masse once. But there's a before and after. That interaction, that in-person becoming acquainted with each other, kind of seeing each other do what you're doing. I could see my counterpart in Japan doing the aha moment. Oh, we've worked on the same code and we have the same starting point. Didn't have to use a language, but it was much more of a presence and interaction in person. Once you've accomplished that, I think I didn't need to go back to Japan. We could email back and forth and they were able to translate as needed. And, working code goes a long way for that type of interaction. So I think in the case with Indiana, we had, suddenly the person you're emailing has a person behind it, right? So we didn't need to go to Indiana. We didn't need to have them come back out for another thematic meal and celebration. But there is a connection that is made. So the value of that became immediately apparent. And that's something that I would apply in most of my other endeavors. Absolutely, without question. When I was at Intel, when I was traveling around the world, whether it was to the Maker Innovator team in IR5 in Leakslip, Intel Leakslip 5, Building 5, or the team in Toulouse, when I don't remember the name, must have been T1 or something. The team in Toulouse that made the Edison, the team in Ireland that made the Galileo, visiting in person to Turin or Torino in Italy, where Arduino is based, in person for 2 weeks and interacting. Suddenly after that, everybody, we know each other, right? We have that commonality. So now when they are ignoring emails or completely disappearing off the face of the earth, you at least can say, well, at least I met them. Those Italians never get involved in a land war with somebody from whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, having been witnessed in person, interacted in person, broken bread, sharing a meal goes a long way. So this was probably one of the key take homes for me in general, from a social psychology standpoint. Obviously part of my career, but certainly part of life is, you should get to know people, and doing it in person is just the way humans are. So that can never be replaced. If you have never met someone in person with whom you are conducting business, that will change the moment you do meet in person, for better or worse. So it's something to realize. And, luckily, I think for me, I realized that pretty early on. And finally, referrals, and this was true certainly after TrueVision, but referrals proved to be intensely valuable. No more clearly demonstrated to me than in this particular experience. So my job at Supermac was the result of fellow alumni from Harvey Mudd working first at Ziff Davis Labs and then later at Supermac, year after year. So there was like a conveyor belt of people getting up to Silicon Valley, working with, I know that person from last year and so on. So it was a nice on-ramp, if you will. My job at Storm was the result of one of the people I was working for at Supermac saying, hey, they're looking for somebody to work for 2 weeks on this thing. So that was Andrew. So I shot over to Supermac, and then Dave, who had been working at Apple until he hit his 18 months, and then he took a job at Supermac, says, hey, if you're looking for a job, you can go work, you can go talk to Jess, the manager who he worked for. And Dave also worked with Linda Spike, who would be pivotal in my joining the Newton group. So I talked to Jess. Jess was in the group of people who, in the class action lawsuit, that capped the contracting time at 18 months. So it was because of him that I would not have stayed at Apple beyond 18 months, given the rate at which I was not getting job offers from interviewing internally, which led to me getting a referral of sorts, thanks to my initial hiring manager at Supermac and his headhunter friend, but also sort of hand-waved a referral from a former colleague from the Apple Quality Group who was now working at TrueVision. And then after that, I would end up back at Apple in the Newton Group, thanks to Linda Spike from Apple Quality. And then I would invite one of my former colleagues from the API test group, Jim, to work when Neil left to share my office and cubicle. I mean, half a cubicle sized office with a door, to come and join the Newton group, which he did. So the value proposition of making and maintaining connections of some sort with your colleagues in the time, this was pre-LinkedIn, the value is clear, and it's something I did proactively. The practice now of probably doing nothing is a far cry from like, oh, give me your resume. I will put it in the hands of the hiring manager, and then I will ask that person whether they contacted you yet, and so on, right? So back in the day, the value of referrals, and I'm not saying they've diminished today, but the value of referrals and the practice of making those referrals, which has diminished, was difficult. And this was in, like I said, the time when if you had a pen, you could get a job. But if you wanted to hire really good people, you went with this personal referral, right? What do you think of so-and-so? Should we hire Dan Hugo? Dan, do you have any other friends? Et cetera, right? So the value of the referral to the workplace dynamics in the Silicon Valley.com era, granted, a total mixed bag. If you had somebody who was marginal or who did not, there were people there who were just there to get the next job. So they would get the referrals, they would get the paycheck, they would do their thing until something better came along, and they would go and they would bring their friends. So you often had, if someone was to make a network graph of it, there would probably be some visible like clustering of like, that group of people wasn't wonderful, but this group, like everybody that came from Harvey Mudd who referred their underclass people after they graduated and brought them in. And yeah, so I think it was a mixed bag sort of, but I think when it did work, it worked out particularly well. And I think that's where a lot of success came out of Silicon Valley, was the sense that you knew coworkers and colleagues and you knew them at different companies. There was sort of a pool, a swirling, not quite a whirlpool, not a, what do you call it? What do you call the whirlpool? Is it a whirlpool? There wasn't quite like a down current, or that wasn't drawing people underwater and destroying things, but there was enough people moving around so that you probably knew someone at that company. You probably knew someone from college that now works over there. So there was just enough of that in those early days. And then in the early mid 90s, later in the 90s, it got a little bit weirder. There were a lot more people who were paycheck players, as they say. I myself, I think I did an episode about this, about chasing the stock options. Like, ooh, I'm going there for the options. I think that's where things started turning a little sour, but that's another episode for another time. So that's where I'm going to end this today. TrueVision was, like I said, sort of a knee or an elbow, a hockey stick, if you like, if you were going to make a chart of my travels through Silicon Valley. It was a inflection point. It was a direction change. It was a lot of realizations about a few different things that I've already gone over, but it was the transition, the sort of I'm not going to say it was like panic, but it was just in the nick of time, or just at the right time, the change where I was saying, I don't want to be just a tester. Oh, you're just a tester. I didn't think that was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to be healthy. I felt like it was something I needed to change or move towards changing. And so True Vision happened right at the right time with some very interesting people, some very smart people, a lot of good, positive, and educational experiences. And then I would go on to the Newton Group and on from there. And so, Silicon Valley, I would say for me, technically it started in July of 1993 when I started working at Supermac. But I would say my engineering career, engineering proper, like QA should be part of that. So engineering, product design, development, all that. It's kind of all interrelated. And when you don't think that, I think you run into problems. But for the purposes of ending this episode, I think my time in Silicon Valley, it was a fundamental direction change, a shift in outlook, shift in direction, a realization that, just because I didn't do that already doesn't mean I can't do it. And if I heard that in an interview, I didn't really accept that. So starting with True Vision, I was really more often getting offered positions, roles, projects that would very quickly pivot or change, right? So I was like, you know what? The interview about a particular job doesn't matter so much as whether I could be a part of what they're working on in general, because I'm probably going to end up working on something else, which was like almost universally the case. True Vision, perhaps aptly named for me. And that is where I will leave today's episode. Quaggling Sand. The feeling is finally returning. Take care. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. Not to buy me a coffee, although you're welcome to do so, but eventually. So I'm saying this for people in perpetuity. There will be quagglingsand.com. There's ffstalk.com, cafegenius.org, and of course, innovateforvegas.org. So there will be primary points of publication for our media, so you can always find them. And then we'll continue to publish to other, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. And maybe we'll add some video and whatever. So all that stuff will be made public in a variety of places, including buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, coffee.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. And that is where we'll end today's episode. Thank you. Goodbye.